Hello everybody, Glass Half Dead here. Let's talk about Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team and specifically the numbers of factions and winners taken in September tournament events. There's a cat outside, very cool, that also have had 20 or more attendees. Quick note on why do I pick tournaments that have 20 or more attendees? Great question. That is because I think that at lower number of players, you kind of you get a few weird things, and they just have less statistical relevancy. Although, to be clear, if you want to talk about real statistics, we just don't have enough data at all. But you know, you've got to draw a line in the sand somewhere, and that's my line in the sand. So I've managed. I think throughout September we had 4 events that I've managed to get data from. That includes the LGT, which was just at this time of recording yesterday. Although I did something weird there. So the way the LGT worked, for those of you unaware, it ended up being 38 players, and they did 2 days, but day 2 was a top 8 cut. So if you came in the first day in the top 8, you then did a second tournament that was just the 8 of you. We're going to talk about that, but be aware that the day 2 doesn't appear on this because it was only 8 players. So because it was an 8-player tournament at that point. So although that was an interesting thing, it doesn't appear in this. With that said, let's have a very quick look. I'm not actually going to pay too much attention to the numbers, but I will explain my pie charts to you. So just very quickly, I think the total number of players over all of these events was 130, I'm going to check, 128. 128 players over all of the events. Is that right? No, it wasn't. I've lied. It was 136. 8 of those players were compendium teams, and I did not put the compendium teams on my bar chart. Off the top of my head, it was Tyranids, 2 Talons, a regular Space Marines player, probably some other stuff too. But there you go. So, you know, regular Imperial Guard. I think there were 2 of those as well. Fine. So I didn't really include them. Anyway, let's have a look at... So, man, I just love looking at stats. You know me, I'm an absolute hipster. I look for the lowest played faction, and that's my jam. Now, the reason I went with September is because in September we have had access to all of our new teams from Into the Dark and the Annual. So we are going to see Intercession Squad. As you can see, that is the new hotness, apparently. We are also going to see Breachers, we're going to see Kroot, except we're not, and we're going to see Gelapox and Elicidian Starstriders, except we're not. So just be aware that they are in existence for this month. So there you go. Right, so first things first, the faction totals. This is just over all of the events of September, how many people took what. Intercession Squad clearly leading the field there with 17.2% of the field all being Intercession. This makes sense. This is no shock to anybody who would not, you know, see this one coming. It's a free team. It's the most popular faction in the universe of Warhammer 40k. It's a cheap team. Yeah, like, there you go. This is no shock on men. Also, it's an elite team, which means you don't need as many models, so there's less hobby to do, etc. Following them up very closely is actually the Legionaries. I've got to say, Legionaries being as big a faction as they are has surprised me a bit. Now, this could just be my own blind spot, but I never really thought that Chaos Space Marines were that popular in 40k. I don't know why I thought that. Obviously, logically, that doesn't make much sense. They're like the antagonist faction, and they should be big and cool. But yeah, Legionaries. Also, obviously, they share a lot of similar DNA with the Intercession Squad there, in that, well, you know, elite team, not much hobby. And I was about to say also cheap, but actually, a little bit of kill team win here, right, guys? Like, apart from the White Dwarf teams, all of these are just a 1-box team. You're done. It's great. We then have, I believe it's Vetgard next at 10.2%. Yes, that's right. So we have Vetgard. Now, Vetgard are kind of the big scary guys, really, in that everybody thinks that... No, not everybody thinks, but they win a lot of stuff. So it's not surprising to see them. And if we look at who's just below them, that's right, it's Commandos, who are both of the two original factions from Octarius there. Doesn't surprise me hugely. And I think that's quite an interesting paradigm to look at, because you could argue that in a tournament, people are taking Vetgard because they're really good and they have the potential to be the best team, potentially. So you'd expect to see a lot of them in a competitive tournament environment. But right now, Commandos are not doing very well at all. So to see Commandos and Vetgard almost being taken the same kind of implies that perhaps there's something else going on with the numbers. Maybe the Commando models are just so amazing that people want to take them. Or maybe people, I don't know, like get into whatever their first army is and stick with that for a long time. And because Octarius was the first thing, who knows? Don't know why Commandos are so well represented there, but so far it does seem that everything, in a weird way, could be based on hobby time. So Intercession, Squad and Legionaries, only 6 models. That's easy hobby. Vetgard, Commandos, you've had the longest amount of time to hobby them. And then right next to Commandos, same number of takers is Pathfinders. I mean, they're just OP, right? So, yeah. Also, I want to throw this out. Tau are incredibly popular. I know that everybody memes on them, but the reason everybody memes on them is because everybody has played against them because they are so popular. Just want to throw that out there. So, Pathfinders being up there, not a surprise to me at all. Okay. And then obviously you can look at everything else yourself. It is what it is. Of note, there are no Kroot. Sorry, there was one Kroot. I actually have a suspicion he didn't turn up. I can't remember if there is one Kroot player. Sorry, that is a single Kroot player. I believe he was in one of the Spanish tournaments that just happened this weekend. So I don't know if he turned up or not. But yeah, just one Kroot player, which is odd. Until you think, like, okay, well, you know what? ITD's only just released. Fair enough. But I think we ended up with, like, 4 or 5 Navy Breacher players. So, a real shocker for me, a Xenos lover, a scum Xenos lover as I am, to not see as many Kroot. I wonder if that's... you know, I really struggle to imagine that Kroot aren't as liked as Breachers, like, popularity-wise. But maybe they're not. And maybe this is just pure... people like the Imperium, so more people like Breachers than Kroot. Or it could be there was so much negativity about the Kroot power levels that people decided, oh, I won't take them to a tournament. Who knows? We didn't get any Elucidian Starstriders, which I'm actually pretty surprised by. I agree that of the offerings from ITD, perhaps, you know, they didn't stand out. You know, they were among Regal Company, of course. I mean, there was a lot going on there. Like, every faction had... Well, personally, I didn't like the Breachers, but whatever. But, like, everything else there was very interesting. So, I guess maybe they were just outshone? Maybe? But we did have a few Gelapox players, which is cool. So that's the faction totals. Let's go down to army style. So this was just... I don't know, I just think it's interesting. Just think it's interesting to see what kind of things people are liking to play in terms of archetype as opposed to, you know, like the actual faction. The reason this was actually the reason that I began compiling these stats, because to the LGT, I think that like a full, like 38% was Legionary. Intercession Squad. And then like another 25% was Legionary. So the actual like makeup of the tournament was you have to have an answer for an elite 6-man power armor team. If you didn't, you probably weren't going to win, right? So that's what made me sit down and think, right, I need to take some stats here. However, once I then added it all up, as we can see, across multiple tournaments, actually, okay, yes, power armor is taking up the majority, but only just. Which, yeah, there you go. So that kind of allayed my fears that, the entire scene was just going to be swamped by intercession. But again, you do need to know how to play against intercession, 100%. You won't be able to get around them. If you're in a tournament, you will play intercession, essentially. But yeah, so just interesting. So power armor teams are Intercession, Phobos, Legionary, Warp Coven. Yeah, that's all right. I think so. Yeah. Horde are... Oh, okay, so, sorry, mid-range, it just means everything else. And that is, if your models are between 7 and 11, I've put you there. Everything else goes into Horde. So that means that the Horde is... Breaches? Oh man, doing this off the top of my head. Okay, alright. So the Horde are Breaches, Vetgard, Wormblade. That's what they're called, right? Wormblade, yeah. Pathfinders, and probably others. Not Kroot. Kroot are just within the mid-range. 12 plus models. There you go. So cool. And then Compendium, again, I think there were only 8 Compendium. So, you know, they're there because you do have to account for them because otherwise the numbers don't add up. But I don't really have a huge interest. Very interesting though, actually, sorry. Very interestingly. In the 20 plus player tournaments, there were no Death Guard. There were no Craft World. And I say that's interesting because those are probably, if I had to put some numbers on things, 2 of the biggest teams. Me saying, you know what, let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about Craft World. But a lot of people have been really into Death Guard, that's for sure. So, them, you know, them not appearing is actually a bit of a shock. There you go. Yeah, cool. Right, which takes us to the actual top 4s. Now, the reason we then, you know, I mean, that's all interesting stuff. All of this, the faction totals, I would legitimately use this as a way to pick a faction that I might be interested in, right? Like, legit. I might say, oh, you know what? Suddenly, not many people playing Novitiates, not many people playing Phobos, nobody playing Kroot, I'll go grab that. Not many people playing Warp Coven and they just got buffed. Do be aware, of course, that the buffs are not in effect for any of these tournaments yet, so that might change. In fact, it will be very interesting to see next month if we get more Warp Coven players. But I might legitimately use faction totals to decide which is a hipster faction. For example, what are we looking at? I don't know. Well, yeah, I mean, Warp Coven, but they've just got buffs, so that doesn't count. Gellerpox, very small as well. Phobos. Phobos have just had a buff. I don't know. I feel like Phobos, if you get really good with them, are probably better than they are currently represented. The reason for that being that they're a high skilled cap team potentially. And so they're not easy to play. And so inevitably, the best players that want to win tournaments, which generally tend to be the better players, will not play them. Not because they're trash, but because you have to take into account the amount of mental fatigue. And if you're playing Phobos, a very high skill cap team, and somebody else is playing whatever, an easier to play team, and you're of equal skill level, well, the other person is going to win at that point. So you kind of want to have your most basic bitch team, if I will. Anyway, so that's what I would use the faction totals for. But then, top 4. This is just an interesting thing to look at. So, I do have to make a slight caveat, which is the LGT does not appear on this list, or the day 2, the top 8, because, so this is the top 4 for, I think it was 4 or 5 tournaments that I ended up tallying. Great. Day 2 of the LGT was a top 8. As I've mentioned, I have not included it here, but I do want to just quickly point out here, now, once the, you know, so, at the LGT, there were 3 Pathfinder players. All 3 of them finished in the top 8, so they all made it to the second day. And the scoring on day 2 in the 8-person tournament was first, second, third, all Pathfinders. I'm just not going to talk about that. Again, because the top 8 doesn't fit its metric, and likewise for the second full tournament, for day 2 of the LGT, you then had the top 8 players not in that, including the 3 Pathfinder players. So it just skews all that data, and that's why I didn't include either the top 8 cut or day 2 of the LGT in any of these stats. Just be aware, Pathfinders are pretty okay. I'm just going to throw that out there. So anyway, right at the top, as expected, we have the Vetgard winning 18.8%. Oh, sorry, to be clear, I don't care if you're first, second, third, or fourth. You are just accumulated in this list, because I don't think there's actually a huge difference between first, second, third, and fourth. There you go. Again, this is just my view of it. I could have broken this down into, factions across all tournaments that came first, factions across all tournaments that came second, but I don't really care. To my mind, that is, roll of a dice sort of stuff. So yeah. So for example, for the Vetgard, I believe they only had one coming first, I think, and then they had definitely one coming fourth, and then I think the others were, second and third. Or maybe they were both second or both third or something. But just keep in mind that I am not differentiating at all between first and fourth. And Vetgard have the most placements in that case at almost 20% of the top 4 being them. Followed swiftly by three different factions, the Breachers, the Pathfinders, and the Legionary, also all getting equal placements. I believe they all got 2 placements. Is that how it works? Yes. So, off the top of my head, looking at it now, I believe the Vetgard had 3 in the top 4. Breachers, Pathfinders, Legionary, and Void Dancers had 2 in the top 4. And then everything else had 1 in the top 4 across all the tournaments. So yeah, seems fine. I've got to say, actually, this feels like a pretty good spread, considering we only have it was 4 tournaments I ended up tallying in the end. Yeah, this isn't bad. This isn't bad. I mean, maybe Vetgard need to be looked at, but I think because they are consistently a strong team, but I think that if you mess with Vetgard, you're going to really hurt new players. Because if you recall, of course, Vetgard, they had some issues when we first started playing the game. And if they were to take a nerf, you'd just be ruining new players, I think. Pathfinders, however, although they are not overrepresented in this chart, in fact they sit just in line with Breachers, a brand new team, so that's a little bit scary. Maybe Breachers need to be looked at, but we'll wait for tournament data, right? Void Dancers, a team I hate, and Legionary, an okay team. Actually, quite interestingly, Legionary are one of the, and Intercession are one of the teams that are very heavily overrepresented in how many of them have turned up to the tables, but they're not actually placing in line with how many of them in total turn up to the tournament, which you could argue means they're weak, or you could argue the people that take them are, not the top tier players, because the top tier players are playing something else. Beautiful. I'm being very finicky with my wording here. I'm not saying that people that play Legionary or Intercession are bad, to be clear, obviously. I think that probably, for example, Pathfinders have a pretty good matchup into them. And because Pathfinders are such a strong team right now, you're just gonna, anyway, so yeah, Vetgard, sweet. Breachers, I'm a bit surprised to see them placing twice. Again, this is probably just because these are all open boards as well. That's something to note. I don't really know enough about Breachers yet. This is the first month they've been out and being played in tournaments, so obviously something interesting is happening there. It'd definitely be cool to see some of the top players that placed with them kind of breaking them down for us in the future. Pathfinders, I'm surprised so few Pathfinders. But again, that is because I have selected very odd data sets, very small data sets. So obviously nothing here is truly representative, but yeah. Void Dancers, yeah, I think Void Dancers, I guess this will be my final word because we're dragging on here, but Void Dancers are such an interesting team in that they are very hard to play around for new players. And they're really good at the top as well. They're soul crushing against new players, but they have, from what I hear, pretty hard counters by some of the top better teams. Although also they are great counters for other things. They're a little bit of a gatekeeper faction in the sense that they do so many weird things that you need to have an answer for them. They're one of the teams you should be playing into if you're going to a tournament, kind of alongside Intercession. Intercession, because you're going to see so many of them, you have to know how to deal with them. Same with Legionary, but I would say same with Void Dancers, because they're just different to everything else. And if you go up against them, they're going to do weird things and do things differently. So you have to know how to play against them. But again, they are a hard counter to certain things. So they are a bit of a gatekeeper, and they are also a massive skill hurdle, jump, step up thing. So, yeah. Luckily, not many people really like Harlequins, so it's fine. Losers. Alright, cool. Anyway, Pathfinders need a nerf. Vetgard need a nerf, but not in the way that affects new players, I guess. I don't know. That's it. Hype. Anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this quick little rundown. I realise it's just been 3 pie charts, but I don't know. It's enough for me. Be honest with me, guys. Are you going to do the same faction hipster thing I do and just look at the faction totals, skip the rest, and say, oh yeah, I'm going to pick whichever has the smallest number, which on this is, well, Kroot and Gellerpox. But of course, truly, it's actually Eliciting Starstriders because they have had 0 picks. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Glass Half Dead. I hope you stay safe. Play Killteam. Nice. Hello everybody, Glass Half Dead here. Let's talk about Warhammer 40,000 Killteam. Today we're talking about the tournaments in September, the factions taken, the numbers of those. I'm going to start this again.